All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Shabazz, and today with my project partner, Eli, we'll be sharing on our project, our Data Plus project for this summer. So as a brief overview, our project generally we're exploring a new methodology to understand the 2008 mortgage lending crisis from the state level perspective, particularly by looking at mortgage enforcement actions issued by each state, which are basically legal documents issued by different state regulatory agencies for perceived misconduct in mortgage markets. So essentially what we did was generally process this, find trends within these MEAs using a mix of NLP models and LDA models to try and find any patterns that we could look at. So specifically looking, so Ohio stores most of its MEAs as PDFs on a government database, whereas Massachusetts stores most of their MEAs as web pages on their website. So because of that, we had to use very different methods to extract the MEAs, the text from the MEAs from the respective sites. We use a mix of web automation as well as AWS TextRack, which is an OCR technology, in order to extract text from Ohio, and we use web scraping to extract text from the web pages of Massachusetts. So we have 7,241 entries overall, majority of which came from Ohio. Because we were dealing specifically with very legal texts, one issue that we ran in very early on was that there was a lot of text that wasn't exactly relevant to what we were looking for. We were looking to see patterns of wrongdoing or patterns of misconduct, but there was a lot of text that essentially just quoted what the relevant laws were or quoted what the actions were, which wasn't very relevant to what we were looking at. So because of that, we decided to use an approach because we realized that there was actually a consistent structure within these different MEAs where there were specific terms like allegations, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and whereas these key terms between which we had actually we found key segments that was relevant to our research. So we used these key markers for different texts and extracted the text that was relevant to our research. So once we extracted this text, we actually we used a standard NLP processing workflow. We extracted the text, we tokenized it, stemmed it, converted all of it into a standardized form, lemmatization, as well as removed standard stop words. But something that we also did was that we realized that even though we had extracted a lot of irrelevant clauses from the legal texts, there were still many legal terms such as classification, like Commonwealth, jurisdiction, act, codified, law that wasn't very relevant to what we were looking at, and because of that we actually remove extra irrelevant terms from the text so that we could construct coherent topic models. And for the building of topic models, we use GANSIM to conduct latent Dirichlet allocation, which is a very standard model to essentially produce topic models that essentially classify different categories of misconduct. And in order to find the right number of topic models, we essentially adjusted to find a topic model with high coherence values, C values, using an elbow plot, as well as using PyLDA-Vis, as you can see here in this picture, in this diagram, to discern how we could get coherent topic models that made sense regarding the kinds of misconduct that we were researching.
So now that we've established our framework for analysis, I'm going to get into some of our actual findings. I'm going to discuss 2 for Ohio and 2 for Massachusetts. Now for Ohio, a lot of our more interesting findings were predicated on our topic models and their respective classifications. In my opinion, our most interesting was centered around the 2007 Home Buyers Protection Act, which was a bill that not only expanded the scope of backgrounds, but also the depth to which people could be prosecuted in terms of being issued a mortgage enforcement action. So prior to this bill, you could apply to be a loan originator in the state of Ohio if you had committed theft in the past or embezzlement in the past, as long as you had not committed a felony. This bill changed the standard. And so as we see in our graph, in 2007, when this bill was signed, this proactive approach to regulation had a dramatic effect on criminal conduct, as a previously increasing trend automatically began to decrease and mirror that of those with a criminal background who were applying to become loan originators and issue mortgages. Now, on the flip side of that, We also were able to look at some reactive legislation, particularly from the Ohio Mortgage Broker Act, or OMBA, which was signed in 2001. This act put in education requirements and a number of hours that must be put in beforehand to be able to fully understand the market before you're able to operate within it. And what we see in this graph is it was very good at identifying people who were not completely qualified, at least in terms of the state's requirements retroactively. However, it did not do very much to prevent people who did not meet these qualifications from applying to give loans, as shown by the general increase of this graph, with the only decrease coming from 2004 to 2005, and right after the recession itself in 2008. Now, for Massachusetts, as you can see in our graph down here, there were much less mortgage enforcement actions in Massachusetts, as stated, but it remained relatively low, but there was a spike in 2009 and another spike in 2010. Our findings for Massachusetts sought to understand those spikes. So for 2009, while investigating, we came across legislation that was passed specifically around a surety bond requirement. Now, a surety bond essentially means that in the event of a foreclosure or someone defaulting on that loan, the person who issued the loan has to gain responsibility of gain that responsibility of paying it off to the bank. So Massachusetts was requiring loan originators to put up a certain amount of money in order to say that if this person does not foreclose, if this person forecloses, you have some resources put aside in order to cover that loss. And based on our topic models, we can see that the vast majority of the mortgage enforcement actions issued at this time were failure to meet regulatory standards. And upon closer inspection, when we dove deeper into the mortgage enforcement actions themselves, we found that they were all completely related to the surety bonds, all 83. Now, the spike in 2010 was a little smaller, but equally as disruptive to the trends of our data. What we found is in mid-2009, Massachusetts passed the SAFE Act, which was part of the federal approach to prevent something like 2008 from happening again, which adopted the NMLS standards, in particular the NMLS test, which is a test of ethics and conduct and mortgage conduct and mortgage law. Essentially, it's a gauge for how well do you understand the market and how well do you understand your place in the market. 75% is needed to pass this test. In 2010, we found that the overwhelming number of mortgage enforcement actions issued in this time were a failure to pass this test, with number 2 being administrative penalty or criminal history. That's reflective a little bit of weakness in our model, one of the limitations of our project. So when we dove deeper into these mortgage enforcement actions, we found that the administrative penalty was almost exclusively failure to pass the NMLS test. And our model was also picking up other infractions that were very relevant in the mortgage enforcement action, as Massachusetts has a tendency to clump a number of infractions into one document. So that brings us to our conclusion. Now, our main conclusion was when the state pursued proactive legislation instead of reactive legislation, it was hugely effective at stopping malpractice in its tracks and preventing it going forward. This was shown especially in Ohio with the Home Buyers Protection Act, and it was also shown in Massachusetts, as soon as they adopted these standards and began to hold everyone to these standards, there were a number of mortgage enforcement actions issued that related to a huge drop-off. We highlighted a lot of avenues for the Best Connections team to pursue, such as continuing this kind of approach for the other 48 states in the union, as well as analyzing the laws themselves more in depth to understand what worked and what didn't. And we also, for our oral history sub-team, we essentially have a list of people who are worth interviewing at the state level to better understand the general trends. We also created an interactive dashboard, which we can access using this link, as well as a username and login and a video to explain how it works in case people want to parse through our data ourselves. That's the extent of our presentation. If there are any questions, feel free to ask now.
Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if you could demo your dashboard a little bit, maybe.
Oh, I would be happy to. Hold on.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing for a bit and then open up the dashboard and then reshare because sometimes it takes a while to load.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. I would just love to see how that works. If you can give me a hypothetical scenario and run it through, I would love to see how that.
Yes. Okay. So my bad. I should have had this open before the presentation, but.
Well, I just get excited when I see dashboards. Like not everybody does them, and so it's really cool to see. Things.
Oh, I don't blame you. Dashboards are great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So yeah, basically our dashboard is, I'm just kind of gonna fill time as it loads. Our dashboard is a interactive way for us to see the general trends of our data, and through Kibana, we're able to dive deeper into specific mortgage enforcement actions. And so, hold on.
Checking about load. Yep, I think it's loading up.
Yep, it's loaded up. And so one thing that Kibana does is it only processes data from the time frame that's stated, which helps with the interaction, but it means that it always starts with 15 minutes ago. And since our period of analysis is 2000 until 2010, 15 minutes ago is not a very good proxy. So let me go with this one and then change 2003 to 2000.
Yep, and then that should have all of them. Yep. And there we go.
And there we go. And so here we are. We can, wait, yep, okay, there we go. So here's the overall graph of the mortgage enforcement actions, the different entity types, the enforcement actions themselves. The word cloud looks blank right now, but once filters start to be added, we can dive deeper into it. Our topics and our classifications, secondary topics for topics where our model wasn't as strong, we wanted to cover possible secondary reasons to make up for that difference. And the way that this works is we can go state enforcing. Let's do Ohio. Entity type. What do you think, Chavez? What entity type? RM?
Let's do RM. RM's pretty interesting.
And just like that, we went from 7,000 to 1,000.
It'll be around there. Yes. In case, because it can be a little bit confusing to look at different like specific terms, like for example, RM, OM, we actually prepared a data dictionary that we actually linked on top, that actually provides a detailed explanation of every single entry in our data set.
And so RM refers specifically to people who are categorized under one of the laws signed by Ohio. Was it OMLA?
No, it was the Ohio Residential Mortgage Lending Act. So it's basically brokers and lenders that were licensed in Ohio at the time, companies that were licensed at the time. So there's a lot of legal terms that can be a bit confusing to pass through, but we provide a glossary for people to, so that the users of the dashboard can look more closely and understand our data.
So yeah, RM, mortgage lenders and brokers, they're individuals or institutions, and they're licensed under OMLA and OMLA.
Yes.
Oh, whoops, just OMLA.
Yeah.
And
let's
so
go back to the dashboard.
The way this works is we can we see that for RMs receiving mortgage enforcement actions, there was a small spike in about mid-2003. The vast majority of these mortgage enforcement actions are settlement agreements, with the most common word being violation. Yeah, okay, not vast majority, but a plurality, my bad. And a lot of these were failure to meet educational requirements. as to be able to receive a license to give loans and maintain that license, there are certain education standards that people were held to. We can see that a lot of the RMs were guilty not of criminal conduct or criminal background, but of administrative violations. And our secondary topics reflect that. So if we want to dive a little bit more specifically, let's look at notice of intent to deny renewal. Dashboard works where we can just click on one of the subtopics. So now we're only looking at the 67 RMs who had a notice of intent to deny renewal. And we see that designate and the laws to which they were charged are the most common, with failure to meet hourly requirements still, but as we can see, criminal conduct is a lot higher. And so this is the way we kind of went about our analysis. We would play around with this and try and identify trends, which we would then use to find out what was the cause of those trends and what were the sources. And another cool feature about this is, let me get rid of notice of intent to deny renewal. Say I was really interested in that spike in about mid-2003. Part of what makes Kibana such a great tool is I can actually highlight that section. And what that does is it updates the time filter here at the top. So now all of these are just the mortgage enforcement actions issued between 2002 and 2005. So we can see settlement agreement went from the plurality to the majority in this time. Almost all of them were administrative and almost all of them were failure to meet educational requirements. And that's just a quick primer into how our dashboard works.
So we created this dashboard so that anyone who'd be interested in diving deeper into the data would have an interactive manner in which to do so, and they could. And we also feel that although we explored the data very heavily, there are always more avenues for anyone else to come in and perhaps see patterns that we missed at some point during our analysis.
I'm very impressed with the dashboard. It's well done. Yeah, very well done.
So credit for the dashboard goes exclusively to Malcolm. It was his idea to kind of use this tool to visualize.
Yeah. So I would imagine your data has to be pretty clean and tidy to be able to run that kind of dashboard. How much time did you have to spend getting your data in the right? You guys are getting ready, because I can see a lot of work going into this already. So yeah, can you explain that journey a little bit?
So, what happened at first is that we didn't realize at first how much cleaning would go into it. A lot of our initial processing was we tried to use the raw text in its entirety. That created very weak topic models that were highly irrelevant in most cases. So what we actually spent a week and a half, was it almost 2 weeks, I think, exclusively. You remember that there's a section we mentioned earlier about extracting relevant texts. We spent 2 weeks exclusively using a divide and conquer approach to break down all 7,000 texts piece by piece, like chunk by chunk, until we were able to extract the relevant text as best as we could. And then we spent another 4 or 5 days essentially playing around with like irrelevant words, that the chosen irrelevant words. Sometimes we would take out too many words. Like there was a time, I think, where we didn't realize how significant loan originator, these specific phrases, would be in enforcement actions, and we took them out, and that completely led to completely irrelevant topic models. So we spent about 3 or 4 more days just exclusively taking out and adding in words that we felt were irrelevant based on like the topic models and based on like the based on our understanding of the domain. So in total, about 2 weeks to extract text and another 4 days purely putting in and extracting words out.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that, like, what he's mentioning there also is kind of after the actual initial, like, actually getting the text and actually being able to get everything that we had, because really the data that we had from the beginning wasn't even like the actual data. It was an index of where these mortgage enforcement actions lived in their own state databases. So we had to work on getting the text from those databases into an environment. And then once we actually had them, they're just PDFs, they're raw PDFs you can't get text from. So we have to then put that through another process of extracting the text from that or scraping that from the website to then actually have the word text to then go through what Chavez was saying of, to filter down the words into something actually that's a meaningful chunk for that.
Ariel, you're on mute. But let me just jump in and say, like, this is very like significant work that no one has done before, because the narrative that's like emerged post financial crisis is that like, well, like no one like saw this coming, like the regulators were caught flat-footed. And actually what their data reveals is like, no, actually like a lot of the states here, like Ohio, for instance, they were noticing clearly a lot of people with criminal backgrounds trying to apply to become like mortgage brokers, and that's a sign, right? Like that's a sign that there's a problem like brewing here. And so, but no one has like gone through this effort because it's obviously a lot of effort that they just talked about. So, as it turns out, like we're not surprised, but like there actually were data points to point towards like a brewing crisis. But you have to, look more deeper than what's been done before.
I have a question, Lee, because this is year 3 now, and you guys have definitely pulled up some interesting stuff. I mean, what do you do with this from here out? I mean, because it seems like with this information, you could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because we have a website. Let me get the link for you guys. And so everything will live on the website. So this will ultimately go on the website, and the WordPress site. So we're going to see if we can embed the dashboard. If not, we'll just include like a link to access the dashboard on the site. But I think this will allow us. One of the things we're doing is, someone can put it. I can put it in the chat. Because another part of the project, because this is a Bass Connections as well, is we do oral history interviews. So this actually will help inform our oral history interviews with people at the state level too. And like we can kind of show them some of this data and be like, like what did this tell you? Like what insights did you get from this? You notice that a lot of people with like criminal backgrounds, like did you raise the red flag to the national level? So we have a website. This will go on the website, and then we're actually debating, we're considering writing a book as well that will incorporate some of this work.
I think that this needs to be put in some literature and shared for sure. It's
because the whole premise of like this project, Data Plus, and then the broader project is, a lot of what's been told about the financial crisis has been told from like a very national viewpoint, like DC, New York. But this ultimately was a crisis caused by like the mortgage market. Right. And that meant real people in real neighborhoods, in real communities throughout the country were observing and experiencing problems, but no one has like done this ground up analysis to see how things evolved and what warning signs there were. And it turns out that there were actually a lot of warning signs, and like people were sounding the alarm. It's just that those people's voices like haven't been heard.
Right. Really interesting stuff, guys. Thank you.